Hello and welcome to Kodesh Intentions. Today we're continuing our Imitation of Christ series. This is chapter 5, Reading the Holy Scriptures. In this chapter we will discuss not only reading the Scriptures and the proper attitude and mind to have, but in reading holy literature as well. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, any of the church fathers, any book like that. So let's begin. Truth, not eloquence, is to be sought in reading the Holy Scriptures, and every part must be read in the spirit in which it was written. For in the Scriptures we ought to seek profit rather than polished diction. So let's look at that. Truth, not eloquence. So there's a draw to certain translations because of the way they flow, and that's great. I'm not saying that's not, but there should be Bibles you read for your daily reading and Bibles you study. And by that I mean reading through the chapter is not study. Sitting down and breaking into the words in the Hebrew and the Greek, checking the dictionaries and the commentaries, that is study. Comparing different translations, that is study. You should have a Bible for both, or Bibles for both. Every part must be read in the spirit in which it was written. In the spirit in which it was written. Who's the audience? What is the intention behind the writing? What were they trying to convey? For in the Scriptures we ought to seek profit rather than polished diction. Our desire to read Scripture should never stem from a desire to be known for knowing Scripture. And it's something it's a trap we can fall into for sure. Especially if you love teaching. If you want to learn to share it with others, you must always remember that the ideal behind reading Scripture is to get to know Yah better. It's to get to build that relationship with Yah. Likewise, we ought to read simple and devout books as willingly as learned and profound ones. We ought not to be swayed by the authority of the writer, whether he be a great literary light or an insignificant person, but by the love of simple truth. So when you read someone like Augustine, you read someone who is considered a great figure in history, it can be very easy to give overdue credence to that man and what he believed. And while we should always check with tradition, we should always check with past believers, see what they believed, see why they believed it. They weren't infallible. And we should always weigh what they believed with the whole of Scripture. We ought not to ask who is speaking, but what is said. Men pass away, but the truth of the Lord remains forever. So it's not Augustine said this. We should always look to Scripture says this. Augustine understood that. God speaks to us in many ways without regard for persons. Yah can speak to you through Augustine, or he can speak to you through Joel Osteen. God can speak to you through books that aren't even religious in nature. God can speak to you in any different way he chooses. That being said, we must always be wary and test what we believe is being spoken to us. Our curiosity often impedes our reading of the Scriptures. When we wish to understand and mull over what we ought simply to read and pass by. That being said, there is a time for just reading the Scriptures, opposed from studying. Like I talked about earlier, having a Bible that you love the way it sounds, the way it flows, it really satisfies that literary part of your brain. And then there is a time for study. Every single section of Scripture, every sentence, every phrase, every word, some say every letter, has significance. So there is a time for both, essentially. This should never be taken as a whole that we should never stop and mull over. If you would profit from it, therefore read with humility, simplicity, and faith, and never seek a reputation for being learned. Seek willingly and listen attentively to the words of the saints. Do not be displeased with the sayings of the ancients, for they were not made without purpose. So there's a lot I could say about that. Just because the culture of the ancients is different doesn't mean it was wrong. It's a very hot topic these days. Just because we disagree with the ancients, look at our culture versus their culture, doesn't mean they were wrong. Oftentimes, we're the ones that are lacking. It's our culture that's lacking because it is not biblical. It is not of God. That being said, not everything we read that the ancients believed is true. Not everything that many ancient authors believed is true to begin with. So we must always weigh things with the light of Yahuwah, weigh things with the Holy Scriptures, weigh things with logic. Guys, that was the chapter. It's a short one. Guys, if you've been watching this series, I thank you very much. I hope every single episode edifies you. Please leave me a like, leave me a comment, and tell me what you're getting out of this. I want to know how I can help.